On June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in recorded history. Three massive army groups surged across a 1,800-mile front, expecting a swift collapse of the Soviet Union, but the reality they encountered would reshape the entire war.
Many people think the opening weeks were effortless German victories. But is that really true? What did the Wehrmacht actually face when they crossed the border at dawn that Sunday morning?
The German plan was built on assumptions. The Red Army was disorganized, poorly led, and would crumble under blitzkrieg just as France had. Yet within hours, German soldiers realized this was a completely different kind of war. The Soviets fought with a ferocity that shocked even veteran commanders.
So what made this invasion so different from every campaign the Germans had fought before? Was it sheer numbers, Soviet weapons, or the ideological nature of the conflict?
It was all of these at once. Barbarossa was not just a military clash, it was a collision of worldviews. Germany attacked with 3.3 million troops, but the Soviets had more than 2.5 million soldiers in the frontier districts alone, supported by thousands of tanks, aircraft, and artillery pieces. No European army had ever fielded such depth.
And these weren't just machines. Reports describe entire Soviet units that fought to the last man, refusing to retreat even when surrounded. What drove that resistance?
Partly desperation, partly ideology, and partly the rigid Soviet system. Political officers enforced discipline brutally, but many soldiers also fought out of raw determination. Despite catastrophic losses, they resisted with a stubbornness the Germans had never encountered.
But what about the German advantages? Training, tactics, communication. Didn't blitzkrieg still dominate the battlefield?
It dominated tactically, yes, but Barbarossa was not won or lost at the tactical level. The strategic scale overwhelmed the Wehrmacht's strengths. The Germans won encirclement after encirclement by Minsk, Smolensk, Uman, Kyiv, yet bled dangerously in the process. In the first 9 days alone, they lost 40,000 men. By the end of September, that number exceeded 500,000.
500,000 casualties during what is considered their most successful phase? That already sounds like a warning sign.
Exactly. Barbarossa was a string of Pyrrhic victories. The Germans advanced, but at a cost they could not sustain. Their logistics collapsed, truck fleets disintegrated, and tank units burned through equipment far faster than industry could replace it.
How severe were those tank losses? Many assumed German armor was unstoppable in 1941.
Unstoppable tactically, yes, especially the Panzer III and IV, but attrition tells the real story. By early September, 30% of all operational German tanks were completely destroyed, another 23% were in long-term repair, and only 47% remained battle-ready. The Red Army might lose thousands of tanks, but they had thousands more behind them.
But were those early Soviet tanks actually effective? They had huge numbers, but quality varied.
True, but quantity became its own form of quality. Even poorly coordinated Soviet counterattacks forced the Germans into constant, exhausting engagements. And when newer models appeared, especially the T-34 and KV-1, the Germans realized they lacked weapons capable of defeating them from the front.
That must have been a shock. Encountering tanks your own army couldn't reliably penetrate.
It was a strategic earthquake. German officers repeatedly reported that their anti-tank guns were ineffective. Some infantry units resorted to explosives placed directly on Soviet armor. And even when the Soviets lost hundreds of tanks, their sheer volume meant more kept appearing.
So while Germany won battles, their strength was evaporating. How quickly did this erosion accelerate as the advance continued?
With brutal speed, the deeper they pushed, the longer their supply lines became, and the terrain grew harsher. Mud, dust, heat, then cold, every element worked against them. Truck shortages exploded. Horses died by the tens of thousands. Divisions shrank month by month.
And yet Hitler kept demanding deeper advances toward Leningrad, Kyiv, and Moscow simultaneously.
That was the fatal mistake. The Wehrmacht tried to capture everything and ended up capturing nothing decisively. They split their strength instead of concentrating it. By the time they reached the gates of Moscow, their army was exhausted physically and structurally.
But how did the Soviets manage to rebound from such catastrophic losses earlier in the campaign?
The Soviet Union had strategic depth. Every mile the Germans advanced stretched their logistics while buying the Soviets time to mobilize reserves. New armies appeared constantly, freshly raised, hastily trained, but numerous. By the fall, the Red Army was larger than it had been in June.
Larger, after losing millions?
Yes, that was the Soviet advantage, manpower and industry relocated beyond German reach. As the Germans weakened, the Soviets grew.
So was Barbarossa doomed from the start?
Strategically, yes, the Germans underestimated everything: the size of the Soviet Union, the resilience of its society, the brutality of its system, and the capacity of its industry. They fought brilliantly at the tactical level, but strategically blind.
Then the winter came.
And with it, the collapse of the final illusion that the Soviet Union would break before Germany broke itself. The offensive stalled outside Moscow, and on December 5th, the Red Army launched a massive counterattack. German divisions already bled white could not hold the line. Barbarossa had failed.
A failure sealed not by one battle, but by mathematics, space, manpower, production, and attrition.
Precisely, the greatest invasion in history ended as a catastrophic miscalculation. And from that moment on, the Germans would never regain the strategic initiative. As the German advance stalled before Moscow, the reality of Operation Barbarossa finally became undeniable. The Wehrmacht had shattered its own strength in exchange for victories that no longer brought strategic advantage. The Red Army, despite catastrophic losses, remained capable of absorbing blow after blow, regenerating faster than German planners had ever imagined. By early December, temperatures plunged below -30, trucks froze solid, lubricants turned to glue, and weapons jammed in the hands of exhausted infantry. German units, already reduced by months of combat, found themselves fighting not only a brutal enemy, but a landscape that devoured men and machines alike. When the Red Army launched its counteroffensive on December 5th, the Germans were no longer the unstoppable force they had been in June. Their supply lines stretched thin across thousands of kilometers. Their armored divisions reduced to a fraction of their former strength, and their soldiers worn down by a campaign that was supposed to end before winter.
If the Wehrmacht was already this degraded by December, what did the German High Command think would happen next? Did they still believe the Soviet Union was on the verge of collapse?
The truth is that by December 1941, the German High Command no longer believed in a quick victory. They simply had no alternative plan. Every assumption that had shaped Operation Barbarossa collapsed one by one. The belief that the Soviet Union would crumble after losing its western territories proved false. The assumption that the Red Army would break after losing millions of men proved naive. And above all, the idea that Germany could win a long war of attrition against a nation with vast manpower, enormous industrial capacity, and the ability to relocate entire factories beyond the Urals was a fatal miscalculation that sealed Germany's strategic fate long before Stalingrad or Kursk. As the Soviets pushed the exhausted Germans away from Moscow in the winter counteroffensive, it became clear that the Wehrmacht would never again dictate the tempo of the war. From this moment on, Germany was reacting, not acting, trying desperately to regain the initiative it had thrown away in the snow before Moscow.
So in reality, the failure of Barbarossa wasn't just a failed campaign. It was the moment the entire German war effort crossed a point of no return. Is that why historians say the war was essentially lost already in 1941?
Barbarossa was not simply a military setback, it was a structural collapse of Germany's long-term strategy. By failing to destroy the Soviet Union quickly, Germany entered a war it could not sustain. The Wehrmacht would still fight fiercely for years, but always with diminishing strength, shrinking resources, and fewer options. The winter of 1941 revealed a truth that Nazi leadership refused to accept. The Soviet Union could absorb losses on a scale no European power had ever faced, rebuild entire armies in months, and fight with a level of resilience that outmatched German expectations at every turn. From this point forward, every German offensive, from Case Blue to the Battle of the Bulge, was an attempt to reverse a fate already set during the failure before Moscow. And so, the greatest invasion in history became the turning point of the entire war, the moment Germany lost the initiative, lost its momentum, and ultimately lost the possibility of victory. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.